trends, but I'm not really a big person because you should pursue what you're really good at, what you have skills for, what you have competitive advantage for. It may not be the most popular thing, but that's okay because you're good at that. That will allow you to succeed. Yes, there are trends, but you should be careful about following it because it also means there's lots more competition there, there's lots more people there. So yeah, AI is very popular right now. VR is very, very popular now. We're seeing a lot more to do with automation and a bunch of other stuff coming in. There's a bunch of other trends, but I wouldn't necessarily pursue those. But if you have skill and you want to look for something, what I'll say is look for a problem that you uniquely can solve. You or your teams or others can really uniquely solve and have a competitive advantage for. Go after that. Sure. I think there's always a lot of differences between any given country. I think what I'd focus on in this case, international expansion is obviously more critical here because Taiwan's a more limited market. It's also a little bit more tricky because it's an island, right? I mean, you actually have to physically go there. It's not as easy to expand as it would. But I think what my talk to a lot of Taiwanese companies might be, finish your testing here. Don't get so quick to jump. Try to do the testing here. Make sure the product really works and that you understand it. Then expand. So that's my first one. The second one is good products does not make good companies. It's a component of it, but you need a lot more. So think about all the other facets, whether it's your financial structure, your pricing structure, your marketing, your sales. You need the full team. It's not just the product. It's the full solution and it's the full company. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I think there's a lot of tendency to over-focus on the product. I think one of the hardest things for companies to do is to learn to be succinct and clear on what they do and how they do it and why they're better. When I talk to a lot of companies, they tend to take about 5 minutes to get to their point. And by then, I've pretty much decided already whether I'm going to work with them or not. You need to be able to be very, very short and quick, and only after people have decided they're interested, then go ahead and give more detail. So, for example, I met somebody today, and the first thing he did was shook my hand, and he spent 2 or 3 minutes explaining about him and his background. And I had no idea why that was relevant. I didn't know why I needed to know that. He then spent several minutes explaining to me about a product, a market, which was, I'm not going to get too specific, but a market. Again, I don't know why this is relevant. I'm not really sure what's going on here. At that point, I've long since lost interest, and I'm probably ready to leave. Then he finally says, here's what my company is and what we do. It's very late. So be succinct, get your point. When you, especially if you're talking with someone, they should know why you're there and what you're talking about. So oftentimes you might open up with much more things to say, hey, we produce this product. Here's why it's unique. Here's why it's better. I see you've invested in a company that's close to this. Here's why I think we're a good fit for you. I hate to say getting to the point is fairly important. I do understand there are cultural norms. For example, to say that in Japan, if I were in Japan and opened with that sentence, that would be very rude. I can't imagine how negative that would come off. But I'm not. I'm in the US, especially in VC and venture in Silicon Valley and New York, we're very much to the point because we get a lot of this. So learn to tell your story of what's unique about what you do, what's unique about your company, and why that person cares in a very short period of time, 30 seconds. Otherwise known as elevator pitches.
Okay.
So I think the coachability is think about the last time someone gave you input. Was your first reaction to argue or to think about it and figure out, do I need to do that? Maybe I should. Try for the latter. You can spend a lot more time and think about the fact that every time you argue, you've lost that moment. Even if the person is wrong, it doesn't matter. You have to start seeing the world as a learning experience and not as something for you to win or disprove the other person. If you protect your ego, you've failed to learn. So coachability is when you're willing to sacrifice your ego to learn something new. It's a little bit tricky for me to be an expert in this because we bring them over, and when we bring them through the seed program, we have a dramatically different effect than if they come over without that. Coming over with the seed program, they have a much higher success rate. And the reason they do is because they spend 4 months being able to experiment and test without taking a large risk. where they're being supported by us, so we support that risk taking. For that reason, they have a fairly good success rate coming to the United States. Without a seed program or without somebody supporting it, you have a very high failure rate because people assume things are the same. They assume products can be sold, they assume the markets are similar, they assume there's no competition just like their home market, they assume the payment systems are the same, they assume the laws are the same, and they're not. Things are very different between countries from a startup's point of view. Yes, there are products. People tell me all the time about globalization, one product all over the world. And then you actually talk to the people who actually have to deal with those products and they're like, oh, that's not true. Power systems are different. Communication systems are different. Communication protocols are different. Plugs, table heights, chair, everything is, there's a ton of deltas between countries. So you have to adapt. So my statement is a large number of companies fail because they assume that their experience is still going to be true for the receiving country. And it's oftentimes much more delta than they expected. You know, I don't have enough details to answer that one. There are cases where companies have done massively fast expansion without testing and done very well. It's just statistically challenging. It doesn't mean it can happen, it just means it may not be the right choice to make early on. So some examples of that, I mean, if you look at things like Pokemon, which went around the globally fairly quickly. Did they test it globally? I don't think they did. I think they pretty much made an assumption that Pokemon Go, sorry. It was that Pokemon had been around, that they had fairly good evidence to show it was going to be global. It was a fairly reasonable assumption. But that's a big company. They spent a lot of time building brand globally and testing that out before that was going to be true. A startup, it's pretty risky. Practice. So here's the thing of almost anything. If you get up and you spend the time and effort to do pitching or to go to public or talk about it, you get more comfortable with it. There are a few exceptions. There are some people who really struggle with it and they're not going to get better. But a majority of people just doing it, just trying it out. We used to send people to malls all the time, have them walk around pitching ideas to random people. They were horribly scared. And after they did it for a few days, they realized, oh, this isn't so bad. Now they're much more comfortable. Sometimes in this world, you have to do what you're uncomfortable with to build the skill. So my statement is go out and try it. Do it for a little while. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert, but at least get to know what it is. I think probably the thing I'll offer is something I talk to a lot of startups about, and it's never rational to do a startup. It's never rational. It never is. You do it because it's something you want, because of passion, because it's something you want to accomplish. It's never rational. Accept that it's not at that level, and make sure you understand you've made that choice, in that, yeah, you might fail, but that's okay. The failure rate is very, very high. That doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means that that particular product, time, and sequence of events didn't work out. So I think my biggest advice is don't assume the first one's going to work. It probably won't. It may not even be the third or fourth, but there's an awfully large number of very big successful companies started by people who failed many, many times before they started that company. Be okay with failure.
Okay. Thank you.
I certainly am, because I've certainly failed enough.